All right, so we're diving into something today that sounds a bit like a government conspiracy theory,
Oh, really?
but it's actually a real and growing trend.
Okay.
Strategic Bitcoin reserves. You know how countries stockpile gold?
Right.
Well, imagine that, but with Bitcoin.
That's a pretty good analogy. And what's fascinating is that it's not just governments doing this.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we're seeing businesses, even ones you wouldn't expect, adding Bitcoin to their balance sheets.
Okay, so let's unpack this a little bit.
Yeah.
What exactly is a strategic Bitcoin reserve? Like, is it just a bunch of Bitcoin sitting in a digital vault somewhere?
Essentially, yes. It's a deliberate decision by an organization to hold a significant amount of Bitcoin as part of their long-term financial strategy.
Okay.
It's not about day trading. It's about seeing Bitcoin as a strategic asset.
But why Bitcoin? I get that it's digital and all, but why not just stick with gold or traditional investments?
There are a few reasons, and they all tie back to Bitcoin's unique characteristics.
Okay.
First, there's the fixed supply.
Yep.
Only 21 million Bitcoin will ever exist. And that scarcity appeals to investors, especially in a world where governments can print money at will, potentially devaluing traditional currencies.
Oh, okay.
This is where the concept of Bitcoin as a hedge against inflation comes in.
So it's like a digital version of gold,
Yeah.
which has historically held its value during economic turmoil.
Exactly. That scarcity and perception of value also ties into the idea of Bitcoin as a store of value, something that can preserve wealth over time.
Okay, that makes sense. But isn't Bitcoin super volatile? How can it be a reliable store of value if its price swings wildly?
That's a valid concern, and it's one of the key debates surrounding Bitcoin.
Right.
The volatility is undeniable, but proponents argue that over the long term, Bitcoin's price has consistently trended upwards, outweighing the short-term fluctuations.
So it's a long game, not a get-rich-quick scheme.
Precisely. And the other key reason organizations are drawn to Bitcoin is diversification.
Oh.
It's like the old adage, don't put all your eggs in one basket. Bitcoin, with its unique properties and market behavior, can act as a counterbalance to traditional assets in a portfolio.
It's like adding a dash of something unpredictable, but potentially very rewarding to the mix.
You could say that holding Bitcoin alongside stocks, bonds, and other assets can potentially mitigate losses during market downturns, as Bitcoin doesn't always move in sync with traditional markets.
Well, we've got these compelling reasons, but who's actually doing this? Are there any real-world examples of companies or organizations with these strategic Bitcoin reserves?
Oh, absolutely. One of the most well-known examples is MicroStrategy, a business analytics company.
Yeah.
They've gone all in on Bitcoin, holding billions of dollars worth. They've essentially bet their company on Bitcoin's long-term success.
Well, that's a bold move. What's their rationale beyond just hedging against inflation?
They see Bitcoin as a superior asset to cash, particularly in an environment of increasing inflation.
Okay.
They believe it will appreciate significantly in value over time and are willing to take a calculated risk to potentially reap those rewards.
So they're not just dipping their toes. They're diving headfirst into the Bitcoin pool. But it's not just companies, right? Some countries also started exploring this.
Yes, El Salvador made headlines when they became the first country to make Bitcoin legal tender. They're actively accumulating a national Bitcoin reserve as part of their economic strategy.
That's a pretty radical move for a country to make. What's their thinking behind that?
They believe that adopting Bitcoin will attract foreign investment, boost their economy, and provide financial inclusion for citizens who lack access to traditional banking.
So it's not just about the financial aspect. There's a social and political dimension to it as well.
Exactly. And even within the crypto world itself, we see examples of this strategy.
Okay.
Tether, the company behind the USDT stablecoin, holds a significant portion of their reserves in Bitcoin. This helps to back the value of their stablecoin and maintain stability within the crypto ecosystem.
It seems like this strategic use of Bitcoin is popping up everywhere, from giant corporations to entire countries, and even within the crypto market itself.
You're absolutely right. It really highlights how Bitcoin is becoming more mainstream and is being recognized as a strategic asset by a wide range of players.
Okay, so things are definitely heating up in the world of strategic Bitcoin reserves. But here in the U.S., things got really interesting on March 6, 2025, when former President Trump signed an executive order that shook things up a bit.
That's right. This executive order created quite a stir, especially with its two main components that really pushed the U.S. into the Bitcoin arena.
Let's break those down first. We have the creation of a strategic Bitcoin reserve specifically for the U.S. government, right?
Yes, the U.S. is building its own stash of Bitcoin, and the way they're funding it is quite interesting.
Okay, I'm intrigued. How are they doing that?
This reserve will be funded by Bitcoin, seized in legal cases like those involving cybercrime or money laundering. It's almost like a modern-day pirate's bounty, but instead of gold doubloons, it's digital treasure.
So the government is essentially saying, if you're going to use Bitcoin for illegal activities, we're going to take it and add it to our national reserves.
That's one way to look at it. And the second part of the executive order establishes what's being called the U.S. Digital Asset Stockpile.
This seems like a massive shift. What are the potential ripple effects of having both a strategic reserve and a digital asset stockpile?
Well, the stockpile is designed to be broader than just Bitcoin, likely, including other cryptocurrencies. This signals a willingness to embrace the wider world of digital assets, recognizing that Bitcoin is just the tip of the iceberg.
So the U.S. government is not just dipping its toes into the crypto waters, it's diving right in.
It certainly seems that way, and while this move has generated excitement, it's also sparked a lot of controversy. There are concerns about volatility, the ethical implications of holding seized assets, the potential impact on the U.S. dollar, and the lack of clear guidelines for managing these reserves.
It sounds like this executive order has opened up a Pandora's box of questions about the role of Bitcoin and crypto in our financial system.
You could say that it's forcing us to confront some fundamental questions about the future of finance and the role of digital assets like Bitcoin on the global stage.
All right, so we've established that strategic Bitcoin reserves are a real thing and that they're gaining traction. But let's get down to brass tacks. Why should our listeners care about this? How could this trend potentially impact their lives?
That's a great question. And I think it's important to remember that the rise of strategic Bitcoin reserves isn't just some abstract financial trend. It has real-world implications even for people who aren't directly investing in Bitcoin.
So even if I'm not planning to buy Bitcoin, this is still something I should be paying attention to.
Absolutely. Think about it this way. For centuries, gold has been seen as the ultimate safe haven asset, the thing you turn to when everything else is going haywire. But Bitcoin, with its digital nature, its limited supply, and its growing acceptance, is starting to challenge that dominance.
So it's like Bitcoin is trying to steal gold's crown as the king of safe haven assets.
You could say that, and this shift in perception has implications for everyone because it could impact the global financial system as a whole. As more players, from individuals to corporations to governments, enter the Bitcoin arena, it increases demand, which can drive up its price.
So even if I don't personally own any Bitcoin, its performance could still indirectly affect my financial well-being.
Precisely, especially if it starts to play a larger role in global markets, which seems increasingly likely.
It's kind of like how the price of oil affects everything, even if we don't all drive gas-guzzling cars.
That's a good analogy. And beyond the purely financial aspect, there are also potential societal impacts to consider. The increasing adoption of Bitcoin, particularly by governments, could lead to greater financial inclusion around the world.
What do you mean by financial inclusion?
Well, there are billions of people around the world who don't have access to traditional banking systems. Bitcoin, with its decentralized nature and its ability to be accessed with just a smartphone, could offer a way for these people to participate in the global economy, potentially empowering individuals and communities in unprecedented ways.
So it's like Bitcoin could be a tool for leveling the playing field, giving more people access to financial opportunities that were previously out of reach.
Exactly. And on the flip side, there are also potential risks associated with this trend. The very same features that make Bitcoin attractive, its decentralization and its resistance to censorship, also make it more difficult to regulate and control.
So it's a double-edged sword.
You could say that this difficulty in regulating Bitcoin could potentially lead to challenges in preventing its use for illicit activities.
Oh, right, like money laundering or funding criminal enterprises?
Unfortunately, yes. And it could also raise concerns about financial stability if Bitcoin experiences significant price volatility, which, as we've discussed, is a real possibility.
Okay, so there are potential benefits like increased financial inclusion,
Yeah.
but also risks like the potential for illicit use and market instability.
That's the reality of any disruptive technology. It's important to weigh both the potential upsides and downsides and to approach it with a balanced perspective.
Okay, so back to President Trump's executive order, specifically, the strategic Bitcoin reserve being funded by seized assets. Some are saying that holding onto those assets is unethical. What are your thoughts on that?
That's a complex issue with valid arguments on both sides. Some argue that those funds should be returned to their rightful owners, or at the very least sold through proper legal channels. It raises important questions about property rights and the government's role in managing seized assets.
It's definitely a gray area. There's the argument that if the Bitcoin was obtained illegally, it shouldn't be returned. But then there's also the argument that the government shouldn't be profiting from criminal activity.
And there's the question of how to even determine the rightful owner, especially in cases involving complex cybercrime schemes. It's a thorny issue with no easy answers.
So it's not just about the financial implications of the executive order, but also the ethical and legal considerations.
Absolutely. This executive order is a prime example of how the rapid rise of Bitcoin is forcing us to grapple with a whole host of complex issues that we're still trying to fully understand.
Okay, so the U.S. is making some moves in the Bitcoin space. But how does that compare to what's happening in other parts of the world? Are we leading the charge here, or are other countries ahead of the game?
That's a great question. And the answer is the U.S. is actually playing catch up in many ways.
Oh, really? I had no idea. Can you give us some examples of countries that are ahead of the curve?
Well, we've already talked about El Salvador and their decision to make Bitcoin legal tender. They're actively trying to position themselves as a global leader in the Bitcoin space, attracting investment and fostering innovation. They're even building a Bitcoin city powered by geothermal energy from a volcano.
A Bitcoin city sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie. What's the purpose of that?
They envision it as a hub for Bitcoin businesses, entrepreneurs, and anyone who wants to live in a Bitcoin-based economy. It's a bold experiment, and it'll be fascinating to see how it unfolds.
So they're not just dipping their toes in, they're diving headfirst into the deep end of the Bitcoin pool. What about other countries?
Switzerland, for example, has been very crypto-friendly for years. They've created a regulatory environment that's attractive to blockchain companies and crypto investors, and they're exploring the use of blockchain technology in their financial system.
So they're not necessarily accumulating Bitcoin reserves, but they're creating a supportive environment for crypto to flourish.
Exactly. And then you have countries like Singapore, which has established itself as a global financial hub and is now actively positioning itself as a leader in the crypto space. They're attracting major crypto exchanges and blockchain companies, and they're working to develop a comprehensive regulatory framework for digital assets.
It sounds like a lot of countries are recognizing the potential of crypto and are trying to get ahead of the curve.
Yes, it's like a global race to embrace this new technology and harness its power.
And where does the U.S. stand in this race?
With this executive order, the U.S. is finally entering the race, albeit a bit late. Whether they can catch up to the early adopters and establish themselves as a leader remains to be seen.
So what's the takeaway for our listeners when it comes to understanding the global context of strategic Bitcoin reserves?
I think the key takeaway is this. Strategic Bitcoin reserves aren't just a financial trend. They're a reflection of a fundamental shift in how we think about money technology and power, and the way different countries are approaching this shift will have profound implications for the global balance of power in the years to come.
It's like we're witnessing a global power shift, not just in terms of economics, but also in terms of technological innovation and leadership.
Absolutely. It's an exciting time to be following this trend.
It sure is. All right. So we've talked about the why, the who, and the potential impacts of strategic Bitcoin reserves. But what about the future? What are some of the key trends we should be keeping an eye on?
Well, one of the biggest questions is how central banks around the world will continue to respond to the growing adoption of Bitcoin. Some have embraced it, others are more cautious, but they're all paying attention.
It's like they're all watching each other, trying to figure out the best strategy.
Exactly. Will we see more countries follow El Salvador's lead and adopt Bitcoin as legal tender? Will we see the emergence of central bank digital currencies that are pegged to or backed by Bitcoin?
Those are some big questions, and those answers will have major implications for the global financial system.
Absolutely. And another trend to watch is the evolution of the technology itself. Bitcoin is still a relatively young technology, and it's constantly being improved. We're seeing advancements in scalability, security, and privacy.
So it's not just about the Bitcoin we know today,
Right.
but also about what Bitcoin could become in the future.
Precisely. These advancements could make Bitcoin even more attractive as a reserve asset and could accelerate its adoption by institutions and individuals alike.
And as Bitcoin evolves, wouldn't that force changes in regulations as well?
Absolutely. Governments are still figuring out how to regulate Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. It's a constantly moving target. Will we see more clarity and consistency in regulations? Will we see a global framework for crypto regulation emerge? These are all key questions that will shape the future of the industry.
It's all happening so fast.
It really is.
Well, before we wrap up this part of our deep dive,
Yeah.
I'm curious to know if there's anything else our listeners should be thinking about when it comes to strategic Bitcoin reserves.
I think it's crucial to remember that we're still in the early stages of this trend. There's a lot we don't know, and the landscape is constantly shifting.
So buckle up because it's going to be a wild ride.
You could say that, But with all this uncertainty comes incredible opportunity. The more you understand about Bitcoin blockchain technology and the evolving world of finance, the better equipped you'll be to navigate these changes and make informed decisions.
Knowledge is power.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground in our deep dives into strategic Bitcoin reserves.
Hmm.
We've talked about who the potential impacts, the risks, the global landscape, and even peeked into the future.
It's been quite a journey.
It really has. But as we wrap things up, I want to circle back to the idea of strategic Bitcoin reserves as a strategy. What does this all mean for the average person? Should they be running out to buy Bitcoin?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And like with any investment, there's no one-size-fits-all answer. It really depends on individual circumstances, risk tolerance, and financial goals.
So you're not going to give us a definitive yes or no?
I'm afraid not. But what I can offer are some things to consider, first and foremost. It's crucial to do your research.
Okay.
Don't just jump into Bitcoin because everyone else is talking about it.
Right.
Understand what it is, how it works, the risks involved, and how it might fit into your overall financial plan.
So don't just follow the hype.
Exactly. And don't invest more than you can afford to lose. Bitcoin is still a volatile asset, and its price can fluctuate significantly.
That's a good reminder. It's easy to get caught up in the excitement, but it's important to stay grounded and make responsible decisions.
Absolutely. And if you do decide to invest in Bitcoin, consider diversifying your holdings. Don't put all your eggs in one basket, as they say.
So maybe a little Bitcoin, a little gold, some stocks, some bonds, and maybe even some real estate.
That's one approach. The key is to create a portfolio that aligns with your risk tolerance and long-term goals.
And speaking of long-term goals, I'm curious to hear your final thoughts on the future of strategic Bitcoin reserves. Do you think they're here to stay, or is this just a passing fad?
I believe that strategic Bitcoin reserves are more than just a fad. They represent a fundamental shift in how we think about money and value in the digital age. As Bitcoin continues to gain mainstream acceptance and as its infrastructure matures, I expect to see more institutions, organizations, and even individuals incorporating it into their long-term financial strategies.
So you're bullish on Bitcoin?
I am cautiously optimistic. The technology is sound, the community is passionate, and the use cases are expanding.
There are still challenges ahead.
Of course, we still need to see more regulatory clarity, improved scalability, and increased awareness and education among the general public.
So it's not just about the technology, it's also about the people and the policies that shape its adoption.
Precisely, and that's what makes this such a fascinating space to watch. It's a convergence of technology, finance, politics, and human behavior.
It's like a real-life financial thriller unfolding right before our eyes.
It is, and I have a feeling this story is just getting started. Yeah.
Well, on that note, I want to thank you for joining us on this deep dive into strategic Bitcoin reserves. It's been a wild ride, but I hope you've come away with a deeper understanding of this complex and rapidly evolving trend.
It's been a pleasure.
And for our listeners, remember, the best investment you can make is in your own knowledge. Keep learning, keep exploring, and as always, happy investing.